Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. Super Wednesday, I guess. I don't know what else you would call it. I guess all the days this week are super. Hooray! I don't know. How do you feel about them? Okay, time to round things up from Super Tuesday. Look ahead to the next something less than super, but still relatively large Tuesday, I guess, is what, I don't know what they call it. They sometimes come up with other names. I don't know if we're official on the name for next Tuesday. But the voting is done in, what do we have, 14 states, plus American Samoa. Don't forget about American Samoa. I don't actually know what happened. I think I heard this morning that Bloomberg may have won in American Samoa. So congratulations to Bloomberg. Otherwise, states split yesterday between Biden and Sanders. And we'll have to see what we can find. I don't actually know what this means delegate-wise, but you can, if you are like me and you don't know, go to Daily Kos, of course, and find right up at the top. This makes it very easy. Who won yesterday? What were the percentages by which they won, or at least according to current counts and estimates? But I shouldn't have clicked back because I had all of the delegate information in front of me a second ago, and now it's all gone. So that's pretty cool. I wondered why that happened. Okay, at any rate, it looked like Biden had jumped ahead delegate-wise as well. California looks to be getting its act together and having a decent time of making their count. It looks like Sanders, I think I saw the check mark there, so I guess somebody's predicting Sanders as the winner in California, which is no joke. That's the most delegates there are out there. So, but the momentum of the night, I assume everybody would agree, except for, well, I guess Sanders supporters would come up with an explanation for why this shouldn't be the way you think about this. But the name you saw all over your television screen, because of the number of states that he carried, was Biden. Biden. However, the extraordinarily delegate-rich state of California looks to go to Sanders. It's not winner-take-all, of course, but he'll get a significant chunk of delegates out of that, and out of Texas, where he performed well, but I guess didn't come out on top of the state. Took delegates everywhere. So, you know, the thing to look at is, of course, well, you know what the rules are. Delegates is what secures the nomination. Very interesting night. And it didn't take long for word to come in about the way things were going. So we weren't all lying awake in suspense all night or anything like that. I wonder if maybe if I go back to Daily Kos, will it put up all of that fun information up front? Yeah, there we go. Why does it go away if you actually look at it and then go back? All right, so what the Daily Kos elections folks have put together and is right up at the top of Daily Kos when you go and visit. I don't know. Do I need to actually summarize the results for you? You probably watched it last night. But I guess for myself, I'll take a look at California has 76% of their vote reporting. Remember also, Californians have a sizable vote by mail contingent, and apparently you can submit your ballot by mail right up to Election Day. So long as it is postmarked by Election Day, everything works just fine, and they will count your ballot. It's just how long will it take for ballots mailed yesterday to get where they're going, get counted, get processed, get added to the total. But I guess they feel relatively secure in making their call. Just a 32.8, so let's say 33 to 24, Sanders, Biden. Third place there, just under 15% going to Bloomberg. But depending on how California calculates those delegates from district to district, you can't tell exactly how the delegates are coming out of that just from the numbers. It's, again, usually not the case in most states that that not clearing the 15% mark statewide simply means 0 delegates for you. That's not often the way it works. Big surprises? Well, I guess something of a surprise for Warren in Massachusetts, where you would have liked to see her carry her own home state, and usually not a very good sign if you don't. Vermont, of course, went overwhelmingly for Sanders, where they're very familiar with him. Massachusetts voters had a different choice before them, but it's a lot of people thought that perhaps, in traditional election scenarios, you usually see that if somebody is looking to not run away with their home state, that's about when they start to think about dropping out rather than staying in the election and losing and signaling to the people in your state that you might not be in control of your Senate seat, for instance. And Massachusetts is a weird specimen, of course, and not the sort of place where I would want to send that signal, especially coming in third, quite honestly, because we've seen Massachusetts turn around and do something dumb when it comes to voting for a Senate seat when women candidates, I'm still thinking, not all just women candidates, but I'm thinking Martha Coakley. And you just don't want to do anything but look like you're in total control of the state, quite honestly, and that wasn't so great. So let's see. Maybe I'll click through to the election and delegate tracker again, but by opening a different window so that I don't lose access to the numbers for state by state. Let's see. Sits here so far. Biden sitting at 453 out of the 1,991 delegates needed to win. Leaves him about 1,500 delegates short. So still a long, long way to go. Sanders sitting at 382, according to this tracker. Warren with 50. Bloomberg with 44. So Bloomberg, I think, it appears to me, had outperformed Warren in a number of key places, but Warren sits ahead, maybe largely because Bloomberg was not involved in the first couple of states, but it looks like he won't be involved in the mass of the last couple of states as well. So I think there's also a couple of stray delegates out there, and I think American Samoa may end up having awarded a delegate to Tulsi Gabbard, which will apparently entitle her to an appearance, assuming her campaign continues, in the next debate, which ought to be interesting in that it will be weird that there's an irrelevant person on the stage, and there are so few of them left otherwise. A couple of Klobuchar delegates are in there, 7. Buttigieg with 26, so there'll be some interesting folks in the distinct minority milling around the floor. But that's what what everybody thought was going to end up happening, I guess, is what's going to end up happening. We're going to head toward the wire with a Biden-Sanders race. And here to tell you all about that and how much fun it's going to be is Greg Dworkin. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. I keep tweeting this GIF of Joe Biden sitting in the convertible with his sunglasses on, looking cool.
Oh.
And, well, are you looking at my...
I will now. Yes, yeah. There he is. Okay. He's staring at me.
Yeah, I sent that to you about 15 times because, that's
really?
what's going on.
Okay.
Oh, and there's the delegate race. At the moment, Joe Biden has 670. Bernie Sanders has 589.
Why isn't this up to date on Daily News?
It's what John Anzalone just sent, but that was at 7 a.m.
Okay.
And as counting happens, more will happen. See, but the point is, Biden 670, Bernie 589. This was supposed to be a good night for Joe Biden if he was only 150 behind.
Yes, well, good expectations game playing there.
Well, they weren't expectations game. That's what they were planning.
Oh,
and yet something happened on the way to Super Tuesday. And there's a whole lot that you could write about Super Tuesday. Of course, I have my own theory, which is mine. Dinosaurs are bigger in the middle and small on both ends. But it isn't just that. Of course, you had an incredible number of undecided voters.
Yes.
Undecided voters were shopping.
I didn't find them credible at all.
For a candidate.
Yes.
And they went back and forth. I want this one. No, I want that one. It's Joe. No, it's not Joe. I don't know. 30% were like totally sold on Bernie. And the other 70% is, I don't really know what I want. I'm just not sure. I don't know.
Well, that's
And
a little
so
dangerous.
what happened is that Joe had a decent debate, and then Clyburn happened. And in the process, Elizabeth Warren destroyed Michael Bloomberg, who will
Yes, that was a
probably
great
drop
point.
out today. And that is a big factor. And I thanked her at the time. I think I thanked her on the show at the time, but I certainly did on Twitter. I am eternally grateful for what you just did. And then Super Tuesday happened after Clyburn won South Carolina and then went on to win North Carolina and a whole bunch of other places. Mm-hmm. And we saw an extraordinary shift in the voting population in just the last few days. And the pundit roundup today, which is very long because half of it is coronavirus, maybe we'll do that after the break.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll get that.
But we'll get there. But, when you're looking at what happened and how people made up their mind at the last minute, it was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, here we are years into doing this, and everybody made up their mind in the last minute. And when I say everybody, what I mean is that decided in the last few days via CNN exit polls. This comes from a Ryan Struck tweet, which I'll copy and give to you so you have it.
All right. I like to have record of this.
There it is. Alabama decided in the last few days. Alabama, 62% Biden, 13 Sanders. Tennessee, 61% Biden, 16% Sanders. We often will see late breakers break to one or the other, but it's like 55-45.
Yeah.
This is 61-16. Virginia, 60-17. Minnesota, 55-21. Texas, 49-21. Texas was a case where the early vote came in for Sanders, and everybody knew that the late vote was going to come in for Biden. But unlike California, it wasn't clear whether too much early vote would come in and not enough late vote would come in, and so on and so forth. Texas, 49-21 Sanders. Oklahoma, 45 Biden, 17 Sanders. Oklahoma, I guess, didn't they used to do a caucus? Whatever they did, Sanders has done better there in the past.
Yes.
North Carolina, 43 Biden, 22 Sanders. Maine, 42 Biden, 19 Sanders. It's not here, but I'm told Vermont also had late breakers for Biden.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to imagine a late breaker for, I mean, hundreds, thousands of people did it. But, I sort of feel, well, I guess that was just sort of like, well, I really don't know what I'm going to do.
But yeah, exactly. So why did they do that? Yeah. Well, they didn't really know what they wanted to do. They were shopping around, as I said, for the strongest candidate who looked like they could beat Trump. Now, I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but as you all know, I'm a policy guy and nobody votes on policy, so I just have accepted that. And people really were looking for the most electable candidate. And Bernie did enough stuff, whether it was the Fidel Castro stuff with Florida still coming, and yes, it matters, and oh my goodness, are you sorry now? Or the whole meme about being nasty to your competitor, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. It turned out that it mattered. And this is a coalition of suburban women and older voters and people of color and not in third place. And so when they got to vote, they made it clear what they were thinking. And I would add to that, my own theory, which is mine, is that the coronavirus and the volatile stock markets, which, by the way, are set to give a Biden bounce this morning. That's what the headlines say.
Oh, I'll look and see.
Dow Futures up 700. I sent it to you. You could see it right there. Dow Futures up 700 due to Biden's win. Okay.
Futures are, of course, for billionaires and not us, but okay.
Well, but that's the headline.
Yes.
Right.
Just
keep that in mind as Trump tries to take credit for it. So the point is that you have all of this stuff happening, and the volatile stock market and the coronavirus makes people nervous, and they see Trump's response to it, and that makes them nervous. And so they look for a safe harbor, and there ain't no safer harbor than Joe Biden, and that's my theory.
It's a theory. I just heard it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it's worth. So I'm just saying that when you put it all together, yesterday happened.
That's correct. History, it's observable and unidirectional.
But when you look at the big map, Joe Biden was supposed to win the South. He did. He won African Americans in the South. He did. But he won way bigger than people thought. He also won white working class voters in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Maine. Jonathan Ladd political scientist points out.
Okay.
All right? That coalition is powerful.
It's a lot of Democrats.
Yes.
That's a big deal.
But you know what? It's more than just Democrats. If you can get white working class voters in November, you're good.
If you can. I don't know.
Big if, but I'm just saying, again, the idea isn't to win them. It's to keep the margin down for Trump.
Yeah.
Things like coronavirus and volatile markets and maybe a little coronavirus recession, not out of the realm of possibility now. Yeah. Trump is not happy.
True.
You can tell because he's trying to be on TV every 15 seconds trying to reassure you. Oh, we'll get to that later. But This is what happened yesterday.
It did happen.
No malarkey.
True. Trump, of course, not on the ballot yesterday.
Let's just get real.
Right. Well, I guess so. And that, as far as it takes you, which is
here's the deal. This is what happened.
Yeah. I mean, but I don't know. That doesn't move me in any way. So I don't know what to tell the guy. But yeah, it did happen. I saw it. I just talked about it, and now we'd like to see this happen with Trump on the ballot.
Surprises? Yeah, there were surprises. Massachusetts was a surprise. Did you think that Biden was going to win that? Did you think Virginia was going to go that big?
Yes, that I did.
A week ago, it was tied.
Yeah, but that's why I felt secure in voting for Elizabeth Warren in Virginia. I said it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, you did say so. And we talked about it on Monday. You could feel Northern Virginia slipping to Biden. Yeah. So yeah, but this big? That's pretty big.
You
Oklahoma,
would have seen it if there were yard signs. But
Minnesota, I didn't expect.
Okay.
Texas, I didn't expect.
No. Well, I will say this: Texas, the interesting news out of Texas and California. Again, I guess the highlight of the evening, if there is one, for Bernie Sanders' performance among, do we now say Latinx voters? He's done a great job there, and they've been buoying his candidacy in a lot of the early states. So congratulations
Same with young
for
voters.
the outreach.
So if you can take the older voters, people of color, and suburban women, and add young voters and Latinx voters, you are in very good shape.
Yes, I would like to see what the age cohort breakdowns are as between the various categories into which we force people of color when we have to figure out who they are.
Right. That's not just black voters.
Latinx voters, I think, the population skews younger, I would guess, at least among voters.
Absolutely, and everywhere.
Yeah. So, but
fastest growing demographic, and so a lot of them are younger.
Yeah.
And
so good overlap.
The point isn't so much who they're voting for; it's that they're voting.
Yes, that's the key thing. I mean, whoever gets across the finish line here, if we ever find one, that everyone thinks they've got to turn out the youth vote. Some people pin more to it than others, but that's going to be essential for getting rid of Trump.
Did you think Biden was going to win Maine? It hasn't been called yet, but he's up 33-9 to 33-1.
I didn't know. I didn't have any. I guess I didn't have a prediction for Maine, but I mean, if the idea was, well, it borders Vermont,
it's New England. It's Sanders. They know him.
Yeah,
and they know Warren.
Yes, true. But Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. They likely know him as well.
Once upon a time, yeah.
Yeah, Maine.
And I guess some of those voters
Vermont.
are old enough to remember that.
Yeah. Vermont is unique unto itself. And quite honestly, I mean, maybe he should have had Bernie. Ordinarily, I think would have had a larger section of the vote than 50%. But if you're going to
match his votes to 2016, the argument could be made that he didn't grow his coalition as much as he needed to. And that's really the key to this whole thing. You got to grow your coalition. You can't just go with your base.
Yes.
You got to grow it even a little.
Well, that's
otherwise,
true.
You're not going to win.
Vermont, there's just nobody left there.
Well, I'm not just talking about Vermont. I'm talking about throughout the country.
Yeah, I was stuck on Vermont for a moment. But yeah, you have to grow your coalition everywhere. I don't apply that lesson to Vermont because it's different because it's his home state and it's tiny. But yeah, that's the big thing. And you know what? If I go any further with the grow the coalition thoughts, then we just get to people sniping at one another. So I'm going to stop there.
Oh, yeah? Well, listen, you should get
You
the
can go
people who
on.
don't vote as well as convince the people who do vote. And there you go. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's how you win elections.
Yeah, or that's how you
It's just
win
like so
Brexit.
easy.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough to convince people who don't think any of it matters that they ought to do something, particularly if they're going to have to stand in line to do it, which is the other big story of the night.
Yes, the voter suppression is just horrendous, and Texas shouldn't have to stand 3 hours in line to vote. It's ridiculous. But it is what it is. And so when you step back and look at the whole big picture, it was a really surprisingly, incredibly good night for Joe Biden, even though Bernie won a few states, to the point where some
Utah
of the pundits are looking at this and saying, it's not over. But Bernie's going to have a very difficult time because, look, we got Florida coming up. How's he going to do there? There have been some issues. And how's he going to do in Mississippi? Not a huge state, but again, the better you do in these states, the more delegates you pick up, and this is a delegate race. And how is he going to do in Missouri and other states that are, coming up next? So it's going to be interesting times, and the question on the table is, if you didn't do as well as you wanted to, do you change what you're doing?
No, never.
Well, that's an issue.
That's one way to answer, yes.
It is true. That is one way to answer, and that's an issue. And so, you know what? All kidding aside, the campaign is going to have to wrestle with that. What do they do to keep what they have and change it, because this trajectory is not good for Sanders being the nominee. After all, let me ask you this.
No.
Do you feel, and maybe we can have a show of hands here on radio, do you feel that the person with the plurality should be declared the winner?
Oh, well, am I being asked that?
Well, that was last week. What about this week?
Right. That's an old question. It's no, I'm going to stop with that. But it depends. To me, it depends on the numbers, really.
Okay.
I might be fine with, somebody comes in and says, I have 49% and my next contender has 18%. I'm fine with the plurality winner. 45 to 45.
So Joe Biden has 45% and Bernie Sanders has 39% as of this moment, at least according to the New York Times. Mm-hmm. So
there, I don't know. Actually, what's the question here? Are you asking me? I mean,
is a plurality of delegates enough to declare yourself the winner if this is how it shows up at the end?
No. But you go in with every confidence, and you can declare yourself the winner anytime you want. I guess. Go ahead.
I'm just pointing out the logical inconsistencies that the Sanders campaign is going to have. If in fact they get to the convention and there is no clear winner, but he's behind.
Yes. Well, that'll be very difficult.
He's going to have a lot of trouble convincing people that it's the right thing to do to completely go back on what I just said a month ago.
Yeah, it's doable. I could help him do
doable.
it. I could do it. Anyway,
you couldn't do
I'm
it.
awesome at this.
And he can't do it.
That's possible. Yes. By the way, let's see. What were we going to... I'm going to hold that thought for later, but yeah, I mean, to me, it depends on the numbers, and like I said, it's a mechanics game too here. Like, well, what are you asking people to do, and who are the people you're asking?
All right, so you're going to get mad at me.
All right.
You ready?
Wait till after the break. No, go ahead.
During the break.
All right.
So then we can recover and nobody has to know. You're a bit reluctant to jump on my points here because I think in the end you're not really completely, totally thrilled with Joe Biden being the nominee, and that's the way it looks.
No, that's not. I'm not mad about that. But as you say, people don't vote on policy, and it's a good thing because he sucks on policy.
Well, there's that
to date. But again, things can
but remember,
change.
I mean,
and I do
in a primary, this happens all the time. We saw it with Obama and Clinton. The winner steals the loser's best policies.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's what we want.
Happen. And at this point, we definitely do. There's a lot of a large part of Joe Biden, personality-wise, policy-wise, is the sort of thing that you'd like to be able to say, well, it was a different time. Basically, is what it comes down to. Oh, you find out things like the bankruptcy bills and the various proposals that he's made, some of which he made as a committee leader in the Senate, which dictates a different sort of tactic sometimes, and of course representing
let alone a different
Delaware.
Speaking style.
Yeah, I mean, just
senators
so
debate all points in the middle of a single sentence.
Yeah, policy-wise, a big shift is going to be necessary in order to get super excited, if that's possible, about Biden. Going back to another earlier point about the ability to change your approach as the primaries continue, I think we should give credit here again with the Latinx voters. The outreach from the Sanders campaign seemed like a new branching out and a growing of his coalition. That wasn't a big part of it last time. That was successful, but didn't change the outcome of the race, but was a success by itself. It could stand to be duplicated. Then you'd have a successful execution. You might win a race, but credit for growing his coalition and changing his approach to things at one point. So maybe that means he can do it again. Running out of time, but maybe.
Well, so the fundamental thing about this race is reading the electorate properly.
Okay.
And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And maybe this isn't the populist moment. And maybe it's because of coronavirus and the volatile market, and maybe it's because of Trump. But if it's not a populist moment, then that's a fundamental that Bernie misread.
That would be true. I could excuse him from... I can make excuses anyway for misreading it. One, there was a huge, supposedly, everyone said, populist moment for Trump. Two, well, he's a populist. Like hammers that think everything's their nails, I guess populists think everything is a populist moment, too. That could be it. We'll be back to discuss it in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on here. We're still stuck on elections. It seems like a big deal. Maybe there's more to say.
Yeah, well, that happened yesterday.
Okay.
Because yesterday was like super,
Yes.
So one of the things that also is worth looking at, I think, is endorsements.
Okay.
By
the way, let dairy die. All right, go ahead.
What's that?
I said let dairy die, and then they dragged me off the stage.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot. I needed to
Joe
interrupt you
Biden,
with
as
that.
yet, does not have Secret Service protection.
Right, yes. That's
so he's
true.
got to do it himself, so Joe Biden goes and beats all those people up.
Well, he had a team of women doing it. Not only his wife, but his press secretary. Is that Simone Sanders? Like practically tackled that.
Yeah, and they're good at it.
Yeah.
So one thing that happened is endorsements, and Joe got a bunch of them.
Another dairy
and they probably
person.
mattered. I mean, certainly Clyburn did in South Carolina. Klobuchar certainly did in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to argue she didn't. And the Buttigieg and the Beto stuff, well, he won Texas, so good for Beto.
Yes, right.
All of that mattered. And the Buttigieg one mattered not because it was a particular state you could point to, but it got a chance for Biden, just like at the CNN town hall, to showcase his fundamental decency that he likes to project, which he can because he is.
Yes.
And so talking to Buttigieg about how you remind me of my son, I guess you have to be of a certain age, but that connects with people. That's
true. That struck me when you said it got a chance for him. gave me the cadence of Buttigieg. Buttigieg got a chance for Joe.
Yes, yeah, exactly. My biggest hope is that the quick turnaround in endorsements, wrote Dan Hogan on Twitter, from Buttigieg and Klobuchar allows Biden to essentially inherit or take over the ground game to some extent. Now, remember, this is the funny thing. Don't be yelling at the establishment. The establishment are black voters, if that's what you're saying. The establishment won this for Biden. Actually, Jim Clyburn won this for Biden because voters won this for Biden.
He's kind of establishment-y, but otherwise,
But Joe Biden has no money and he has no ground game. What establishment are you talking about when you mean establishment? Please explain. Fact of the matter is that thing that I told you about, the CNN town hall where he talked about, his son and what it means to him and his faith, and making similar remarks about Beau with Buttigieg during that endorsement. Okay, that was worth. Somebody actually sat down and calculated. That was worth $100 million in what's fatuously called earned media.
Yes.
As opposed to paid media. In other words, free media.
Right.
He didn't pay for that, but he got the value of that.
I think $100 million I would dispute. But okay.
But, they're talking about airtime and what it would cost to buy that airtime. Right? If you keep playing that clip, what's that worth?
Right.
And that clip got played a lot. So, if you're looking at the networks and the cable company breaks away to cover the Buttigieg endorsement live, how many minutes of that and what is that worth? So, okay, you can dispute the exact amount. There's no disputing the fact that he got a ton of free coverage over the last few days.
Right.
From Clyburn, from winning South Carolina, from this whole big momentum thing, the big mo, and he made the most of it.
Yes.
And so the endorsements mattered in that sense, and in specific states they may well have mattered, like in Minnesota. And certainly South Carolina. Nobody disputes that.
No. It's old news, and if you dispute it, you're too late.
Old news meaning Saturday. Today's Wednesday.
That's correct. Frankly, anything that isn't Thursday's news is old at this point.
That's why we have to do more than one show a week,
That's
I mean, because like whatever we said yesterday, things change.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that changes is coronavirus. I was telling Sean Trendy, the data guy from Real Clear Politics, and we were talking about the case fatality rate, which is still pretty high according to the World Health Organization, and the ability to spread this, which is dropping. So it seems to be higher case fatality than we thought, but a little bit less easy to spread.
All right. Well, that's
good.
I'd rather have.
Okay. And so Sean Trendy said, well, I don't know if I believe these numbers. And I said, Sean, let's put it in terms you understand. Okay? Don't make too much of the early exit polls. These are coronavirus early exit polls.
I see. Okay.
Right? Put that in context. They mean something, but don't take them as the final.
Yeah.
They'll be adjusted. That's okay. It's normal. It's not that people are lying to you or that they're all stupid. It's just that it's incomplete data.
Okay. I mean, that's reasonable enough. I don't understand why he says I don't understand. But what was he hoping for?
Because people want a number. I want to know exactly how infectious it is. I want to know exactly how many people die. Why do you want to know that? What is this? Like outbreak, pandemic voyeurism? What do you want to know for?
So that
what's
they
the
can
difference to you
second-guess
personally
people?
between it being a 2% case fatality rate and a 1% case fatality rate? If it's not in your area and nobody's getting sick, what do you care?
Yeah. Well, they want to be an expert.
I saw the movie. I want to know what happens.
Guess so. They wanted to be an expert in everything, and having the numbers is what they. I don't know, but I don't know. Okay, fine. Somehow that confuses him. Okay, Sean.
So let me just send you this because I thought it was funny since you just brought it up. Let's see if I can get there. Here it is. It's a cartoon.
Okay.
It's a fellow sitting at a computer, and he says to his wife, that's odd. My Facebook friends who were constitutional scholars just a month ago are now infectious disease experts.
It's a fast-moving thing, and that's one of the best things about infectious disease.
Exactly, but that's what you just said. So, this happens all the time, and that's why it's really important to go to trusted sources and try to, get a good handle on what's going on.
Yes.
So, what is going on with coronavirus? It's spreading in the United States, which is not a surprise. I told you last week and this beginning of this week, Trump should have told us that was going to happen and then take credit for telling the truth. Instead, he said, oh, we only got about 10 cases and probably none soon. Yeah, that is what he said. Zero.
Yeah, as people die, I guess.
As people die in Washington. And again, it's not a surprise that the deaths happen because it's happening in a very vulnerable community. There's an outbreak in a nursing home. That's the worst possible scenario. And now it's a closed system. And so there's increased reporting number. And now that people have testing, and of course they're over-exaggerating how many tests we can do, they said, we'll have 1 million tests up, the ability to do 1 million tests by the end of the week. The ability to do 1 million tests isn't, I'm going to do 1 million tests. Let's pretend that you are in an Amazon warehouse where things get shipped.
Yes. Here I am.
And it's just you.
I'm very busy.
It's just you.
Oh.
In this huge warehouse.
All right.
Everyone
else quit.
And somebody says to you,
who would say that?
How many boxes can you ship? And you look around and say, well, I got 1 million boxes here. Oh, can you ship all of those in the next hour? Me? Just me? What, are you kidding?
Yeah. Okay.
I can ship 14.
Yeah.
But I have the capability of doing 1 million.
Up to, yes, I guess so. If you help me, but he's the boss and he's not helping. He left.
Well, but the point is, if you are now making these kits and making them available, but you don't have the labs to run them and the personnel in the labs to run them, you can't run every single thing that you say you can do.
That is true. Process.
That's what happened. Alex Azar comes there and says, I want to make Trump happy and make it sound like we have control over everything. We got this. I can run 1 million tests. And the experts are saying, dude, no, that's not how it works. We'll be lucky by the end of the week to at least get these kits in the mail and having them up and running, validating the tests. That's like what you said about the vaccine. You said it was going to be in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we'll be able to maybe start getting one produced. But after that, we got to test it. We got to validate it. That's going to take 1.5 years. Oh, so we will have it in a month. Oh, Mr. President, 1 year to 1.5 years, just like I said Tony Fauci. That's a quote. And Trump said, oh, good, a couple of months.
Yeah.
That exchange actually happened. So everything about the communication that the Trump administration has done is awful and scares people. Then they hear about what's going on in Seattle. I'm telling you, it had an effect on the election yesterday. I don't know what. It's hard to quantify, but it did.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose, right. Again, part of the return, who will help us with the return to normalcy, return to competence?
Yeah, exactly. What if the government actually was telling us the truth? What if the government knew? I'm old enough to remember like a month ago when CDC was respected for like getting it right.
Oh, well, so much for that.
Well, it's bad. Again, once you destroy your credibility, it's really hard to earn it back.
We'll see about that.
Just ask Len Beck.
So. Okay, right, true.
Actually, don't, because that would mean you'd have to talk to him. Don't do that. But, it's just, it's important. So we're at the stage now where we are starting to get testing. And as testing comes, what's going to happen is we're going to find out we have a whole lot more cases that we didn't know. And some of the cases in Washington actually were older cases from mid-February that we're just testing now and finding out, oh, you know what? This thing was here before.
So that's what killed them. Okay. Yeah, right. So now we're an infected country and everyone should ban travel from Americans.
Well, so we are an infected country, and that's why in public health terms, we have to turn from containment to mitigation. That is to say, stop trying to, keep it all in the nursing home and then build a wall around the nursing home that China will pay for, and then we're safe. That's not how it works. What you're going to do is take steps, and the Seattle Public Health Department, as good as they are, is strained in terms of resources. They followed a case from that nursing home to North Carolina. That's how the disease spreads. So now there's a case in North Carolina because somebody had gone and visited somebody in that nursing home and then went home. So now you got to case contact trace every step of the way for that person.
Yes.
On the plane, who was on the plane, where did he go? What about does he have kids? Are they in school? So on and so forth. So it's really complicated, and that's why you can't contain, and that's why you have to say, okay, it's in the community. We only have limited resources. We can't follow every single case forever. So now we have to say, okay, it's in the community. Let's just deal with it. From practical terms, let me just give you an example of how that works in flu season. We're very fastidious about testing flu-like illness at the very beginning of flu season in September, because we want to know when is it here and when is it exploding. And a lot of the tests we do in the beginning are negative. It's a flu-like illness, but it was really just a cold. And then we start to say, oh, we have a case. Oh, we have a case. Oh, today we had 10 cases. Tomorrow, we're not testing. Flu is in your community. If you have flu, take your steps for flu. We found out the answer. It's here. You don't need a flu test to find out that you have flu. If it's in the middle of flu season and if you look like you have flu, you have flu. How do you know you have flu?
True.
Do you feel like you've been hit by a train? Yes. Have you been hit by a train? No. You have the flu. I don't have to test you.
Yeah. You might not, but for all intents and purposes.
Well, on a large population scale, that's all we can do. We don't have tests for everybody.
Even if we have 1 million, it's not enough.
It's not enough.
Okay,
so
true. Right.
that's moving from containment to mitigation. And so what we're going to do is say, okay, it's in your community. Here are the steps you have to take. And that means that things are going to happen. In Seattle, they may stand up isolation centers. It's a small enough outbreak that they may want people to have a place to go if they can't be home alone, if you're elderly or something. If you have a different area, you may start canceling conferences. That's starting to happen.
True.
You may be advised not to travel overseas and really not get on a plane. That hasn't happened yet, but what if you're in Seattle? What's going to happen to the airport there? That's something we have to keep an eye on. Let me put it this way. If you want to see what sorts of things might happen in your area in a month, watch and see what's happening in Seattle now. What's happening in Seattle now is probably not being covered enough by national news, and then all of a sudden they'll discover that Seattle's been disrupted by the presence of a new virus. And next week it'll be a big story on CNN. But it's happening now. So to the extent that you can, go to the Seattle papers, see if you can get news reports from Seattle, and just give yourself a feel for what's going on there.
Yeah, don't actually get their papers. You might
don't go.
From them. Yeah, right. Just read about it online. Like when we say get the Seattle paper,
and wash your hands before you read it.
Yeah, don't go there.
You don't want to
get
pick up computer virus. So go ahead and just educate yourself about what's happening in Seattle, because what's happening there and the response to it may be what happens here, wherever here happens to be.
Okay. Well, it's a long way away, and maybe we can just isolate them because Seattle's just kind of isolated, period. It's just way out there. I've never been there. I can't get there from here.
It's really a lovely city, but bring an umbrella.
All right. Well, that's true. Okay, all right. Well, best of luck then to Seattle. This is about all we can tell them. But all right, that makes a lot of sense, and a good reminder about the tests and how many of them can be administered, and at some point it no longer becomes necessary. And so we'll see where this thing pops up, and what sort of threshold do they have to reach? What are they looking for, infectious disease doctors, before they say, yeah, all right, no more testing. If you've got it, you've got it. It's
right. There's no specific number for that, but you get a feel from it from watching the positives and negatives, the ratio of negative to positive come in. Okay. And you got to get some negatives. You have to test some negative people. If everybody you test is positive, either there's something wrong with your test or you've got a way big problem than you thought.
That's true. Right. I guess that's possible. If there's nothing wrong with this test, I'm just going to stop now because forget it. We're all getting it. So I should just go home. Okay.
Now, for those of you who are interested, Slate Magazine does a maybe a couple of times a week podcast called Trumpcast.
Wow, just a couple times a week. It's like slackers.
And it's slackers compared to us. Good. And so it's hosted by Virginia Heffernan, who's a columnist with the LA Times, and they generally talk about Trump and Trump politics. But they invited me on the show, and I did a podcast for them, and it just went up this morning, and it's about 35 minutes. And if you listen to this show, you'll hear a lot of it. but it's just talking with a different person about the topic of coronavirus. And by the way, what the interface is with that and politics.
Ah, okay, yeah, that is interesting. Where, who, what? Virginia Heffernan, yes.
So it's Trumpcast. You can just Google Trumpcast and Slate, and it's the latest episode.
Okay, we'll put that in a link to right to the episode. We'll put that in the roundup that Scott will post for us later on, and everyone will be able to jump over and hear it. 35 minutes. Is that you're just on for 35 minutes, or is that the
It's
whole
a 35-minute
podcast?
show. So,
easy to.
Usually it's about 35 minutes. I got a little bit extra time because I wouldn't shut up. You know that.
Yeah, right.
Once I get started, I'm hard to shut up.
You guys talk one at a time on that show, or?
Well, I told her that I wasn't going to.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I told her in advance, right? If I'm not interrupting you, it means I'm not listening.
If you're talking to Greg, your community is going to get it.
Yeah, if you got a question for Greg, good luck. You got to let him finish because,
Okay.
That's the way he talks. So I sent you the link, and it'll be in your summary later. But it's a good listen anyway. So if you have nothing to do for 35 minutes, give it a listen.
Okay. And easy to add to your lineup, unlike our show. If you listen to podcasts besides ours, you have to pick one or the other.
Listen to ours first and then do this one.
Yeah, easy to add. Oh, look here. We have a note from Twitter user His Honor, I guess Hizzonr, Stephen E. Brown, who says that he's flying from SeaTac, the Seattle airport, to D.C. No, what are you crazy? Get out of here.
Go to
SeaTac to D.C. for federal grant meeting on Monday. Meeting in Alexandria. Oh, okay. So Alexandria, you're doomed. I got 2 counties between me and Alexandria. It'll never get as far as Loudoun County. Just make sure you're flying to... Are you flying to... I guess the real question, if he's meeting in Alexandria, if he's lucky and has a good travel arranging type person, we don't have travel agents anymore, they're flying him to National, now known as Reagan. For some reason, if you're, which is great, and that's probably what people opt for. They always moan and groan when they come to Dulles. I do too.
It's just so much easier to get into downtown D.C. from Reagan. It's like literally minutes away.
Right. However, if you live next to Dulles Airport, Dulles is awesome, except for all the diseased people that keep flying in. But all right. Well, good luck to all of us, particularly Alexandria, as Stephen Brown lays you all low. So, sorry, suckers in Alexandria. They're done counting their votes, though, so you won't impact that.
So that's always good. So at this particular point in time, there's no reason not to fly. And at this particular point in time, all you have to do is take normal precautions, which is to say, wash your hands. And, if you happen to cough while you're on that airplane, good luck to you.
Yeah, they may throw you off. You might want to cough into
can I have your stuff?
Pretzel bag.
Something like that. But there's really no reason to change everything. I'm just saying,
okay, then,
watch and see how Seattle reacts to all of this. And if any listeners are in Seattle, tweet in to hashtag KITM and tell us a little bit about what things are like where you are right now.
Right. Desolate landscape. That's a good phrase. Try using that one. Thunderdome. I'd like to see a little bit of that. Looks the same
to me. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Whatever it is, give us an idea.
Yeah. If you want to be an alarmist, I can help you. If not, listen to Greg. All right, so no reason for Stephen to cut his visit out. And I don't know, we may be less healthy than you are in Seattle once you get here. Find out.
Does Purell really work? Yeah, it does. Any hand sanitizer that has 60% alcohol or more will work. What if I can't find any in the Seattle area? Yes. It's likely to have been sold out. Well, you take 2 parts rubbing alcohol and then 1 part aloe vera and mix it together, and you got yourself decent hand sanitizer. Is it as good as washing your hands? No, it isn't. Is it better to buy the commercial stuff? Well, probably. So you get the ratio right. But, if that's all you got, you do what you can with what you got.
Okay. I think people can handle it. And
you can add a couple of drops of essential oil of your favorite flavor, eucalyptus or whatever, to make it smell a little better. But it'll work.
Yeah. All right. Well,
get a little aromatherapy while you're at it.
True. Sure. And if anybody has any really unusual essential oils that they recommend, let us know. 'Cause we'll all
Personally,
be
I like the
making
smell of Super Tuesday, so I use that.
Okay. Well, get it while you can.
Get it while you can, because it won't last.
Yeah, right. And that's, maybe next week, Brian Monroe says we'll just have an above average Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can name it after that. Okay, so good. Everyone will stay healthy. No reason for Stephen to worry. You should fly
no reason
unless
to worry,
they close
overly
the
worry,
airport
but
on
do
you.
take precautions. And you got any questions for me before I go?
Why would I? No, I don't know. I don't
Why
think
would
so.
you have any questions? I don't know.
Why would I? I feel like everything has been answered. Yeah. No one has posed any additional questions, although, well, let's see. Well, here's Mike Musson's question.
Hi, Mike.
It's really more of a comment than a question, I guess.
You must be at a scientific meeting.
But back to the populist moment. I wonder if it was a populist moment before this coronavirus disease got everybody worried, and then the populist attacking the system, creating uncertainty, suddenly doesn't seem as good. Oh, that's a theory.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well,
so
that is more
I
of a
point you
comment
to
than a
this
question.
piece by
didn't
Bill
say it was a
Scher, who
question.
talks about that.
Yes. Oh, okay. What do you think?
And it's called Did the Left Misread the 2020 Democratic Primary? It's in Politico. And David has the link, and it will be in his roundup later today.
Okay, great. Question answered. And now I feel good. I was going to say, I don't have anything. But thank you. Mike saves the day, and it looks like we're prepared. Excellent.
Right.
Thanks, Greg.
All righty. Take care, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
All right.
And, maybe we'll just do something completely different because this entire political season just turns on a dime.
Right. So stay tuned tomorrow for Thrilling Thursday, I guess, and we'll see you.
And then we'll get to Fatuous Friday, and we'll have a good week, right?
Right. Okay. Thanks again.
Alrighty, take care.
That wraps it up. You do the same. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. I don't know how much the situation changes between now and then. The vote counts won't change. By the way, a lot of high praise for how quickly Virginia counts its votes. You're welcome. I did all the counting myself. Hand-counted artisanal vote count. It's really not. But people were amazed by how quickly Virginia gets its results done. And I saw a very popular tweet going around last night that Virginia's, elections people ought to be in charge of, or I guess train everybody, everywhere, how to deal with their votes. It's not magic. Virginia's not huge. We're nowhere near the size of California, for instance. But a good point being made, actually, by our own Carolyn Fiddler, who was pointing out Virginia has got elections every year. We do off-year elections for our state legislature and for our governor's race. So, in the odd years, we're voting. And so I guess a reasonable theory on that is that we keep our voting infrastructure in good shape and we keep it well-oiled and running all the time. There are problems. There have been problems. There will continue to be problems. Yes, true. Nothing's perfect here. But they do keep in pretty good shape, and they've built a pretty decent system, and it seems to work pretty well. And I don't know whether it would necessarily work in every state or even any other state, but I assume it would. I don't know how many. I don't know what the uniformity of voting mechanisms is across all the counties of Virginia, but that may help too if you're using one system and one system only. But I don't think that is actually the case. Anyway, I just think that they've got their routine down. I think they get a lot of repeat performers in the volunteers who come out to run the elections. I seem to see the same people running the elections every time when I head out. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe that's just Northern Virginia, and that's where the vote in Virginia is concentrated. The bulk of the population is up in the north, and Northern Virginia is a very political area, being so close to the capital and having so much to do day to day with the capital. And so a lot of times the people who come out to volunteer to run the elections are themselves practiced and competent number crunching and process crunching bureaucrats from the federal government, and then a little bit further to the south from the state government, and maybe that has something to do with it, but maybe not. However, it would probably be a good idea to study what goes on and move it to, let's say, similarly sized states and see if you can do something to improve your repeat performances by your election workers, and they really get a good routine down pat. All right, well, let's see. Other things to move on to. There are many. Let me switch gears. I opened up a couple of tweets that floated across the screen that might be worth sharing as we head towards our break. Let's see. Joe, is he Wiesenthal? We're going to give it that pronunciation. The Stalwart on Twitter. The Bloomberg and Business Magazine fellow who's usually got an eye on Wall Street has this to say about that. If Biden wins the nomination, a lot of Wall Streeters who said that Sanders winning would force them into reluctantly supporting Trump will have to come up with a different reason for voting Trump. And that's probably true. A lot of those guys were probably going to vote Trump in the first place, and they were just faking it being about being afraid of Bernie Sanders so that they would have an excuse to vote for Trump, and they'll end up with that excuse sooner or later. But a good point. Also, in other news out there, other elections going on. Oh, I did find out that Henry Cisneros apparently made it through his primary, or rather Henry Cuellar, and defeating Cisneros, his progressive challenger, so much to our disappointment. But that the power of incumbency is what it is, and unable to pull off the upset there. But good news, and again, news about the power of incumbency. Katie Porter, who has a lot more support from a lot more of us than Cuellar ever did. Katie Porter advanced to a runoff in her House race, and it was questionable because she, of course, now holds a seat that has been traditionally Republican. So it was fantastic that to see that her strong performance in hearings in D.C. has carried her across the line. She'll be there to compete in November. Excellent news. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. I also have news in another race. I guess a very close, well, not very closely watched, but a race of some interest, at least to those of us who know who's who in this race. Tweeted about on just in the last, when was this? Oh, late last night. Vance Ulrich just tweeting about his interest in California politics. The California 25th Congressional District race, which included the host of the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, I think is kind of how we pronounce that. I don't watch the show enough to, unfortunately, to know how to pronounce the name. But I've met him from time to time. I think a long time ago. I think maybe in Chicago, the last of the yearly Coast conventions was probably the last time I actually ran into him. Anyway, he was contesting, I guess we could say, at the very least, for Congress. And you know how they are with their all-in primaries, one single primary, and then top two vote getters go to a runoff, which doesn't necessarily guarantee a November election between a Democrat and a Republican all the time. But Christy Smith, the top vote getter in California's 25th district, and continuing on to November with her, Mike Garcia representing the Republican Party. They're 32% for Smith, 29% for Garcia, 22% for the second Republican in the race, Steve Knight, and a whopping 4% for Cenk. So, if you were a fan, you're out of luck. But I don't know how many people were pulling for him in that primary. Well, it didn't work out. Anyway, just thought I might report those results and see how you take them from there. All right. So, as Greg mentioned, there are updated numbers on the delegate tracker front, from the ones that I saw earlier, from the AP's delegate tracker, which Daily Kos is using, they had much lower numbers, with Biden with 453, Sanders with 382, Warren with 50, Bloomberg 44, and that's flipped a little bit. But now they've got over at New York Times, as Greg shared with us, Biden with 670, Sanders with 589, Bloomberg next with 104, Warren with 97, and so on down the line from there. Pete Buttigieg with 26 in that stands the same. Klobuchar with 7, etc., etc. So that by the numbers is 45% of the necessary goal of 1991 for Biden. So that's you're well along the road to the nomination, with 45% of what you need after, what do we have? We had the 14 states of yesterday, 15 South Carolina, 16 Nevada, and then the 2 early ones, 17 and 18. All right. And again, not far behind, Bernie Sanders, 39%. And Bloomberg, who looks to be getting out of the race, at 7%. Warren, who I don't know what she's going to do exactly. I'm not certain what the planning is there, but we'll probably find out soon. 7%. Pete Buttigieg, 2%. And then it's kind of zeros after that. So, a lot of delegates still out there. And a good question you have to start wondering about, if things hold, for instance, as they are, and you arrive at the convention with 45% of the total delegate count now in Biden's hands and 39% of the delegate count in Sanders' hand. How do you deal with it? Who should win? What's the argument that you make to the superdelegates? And also, don't forget, I know that immediately revolts people that you would then have to be talking to the superdelegates, but they do get a vote after the first ballot. But also remember, you're going to have to talk to the delegates, the regular pledge delegates, because they're released from their pledges for the second ballot. And while there's very little reason to believe, for instance, that Sanders or Biden delegates would change their minds if they arrived as pledged delegates to the convention, very little reason to believe that they would change their minds about who to vote for. As between Biden and Sanders, there is, for one thing, there will be a few scattered. Well, as things stand now, let's see, 104, 204, then let's see, minus 3, 201 delegates as between Bloomberg and Warren at the moment. Another 26 from Buttigieg is 127, and then 134 if you throw in Klobuchar's, and then I guess I thought I saw Tulsi Gabbard's in there. So, not a huge amount, but 250 votes or so could make a big deal. They presumably will feel no compulsion to cast a second ballot vote for Bloomberg or Warren or Buttigieg or Klobuchar or Gabbard, unless, of course, there is some play underway to try and come up with a third option besides Biden and Sanders on the calculation that nobody is satisfied with either of them. But that would be an extraordinary long shot. So you're going to have about, I would think, 250 people in it who will find themselves standing in the shoes of a superdelegate, essentially being unpledged and in play to try to decide which of the two leading contenders would get the nod. And I assume, really, if you're talking about 250 people who otherwise had been sent to the convention on behalf of Michael Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Tulsi Gabbard, where do their votes go? Maybe the Tulsi Gabbard delegate goes to Bernie Sanders. I don't know about the rest of them. And that'll be really interesting. Here's a great question. Well, it's not a great question because it just sets us up for annoyance and disappointment. But I was going to ask, and now it'll be out there, even though I just said it was a bad idea. But what if it's pretty close as between Biden and Sanders, and the difference is made? What if, for some reason, superdelegates were to abstain from voting in the second round, and only previously pledged delegates voted in the second ballot, but they were free to change their votes, and the difference was made up, let's say, in favor of Joe Biden by the 250 or so now released previously pledged delegates. What happens to the narrative that the nomination has been stolen by the party elite or super delegates or people who somehow don't deserve to be there, or who are their votes would otherwise be dismissed as being less than democratic? But what happens if they were fully elected pledged delegates that got released? I don't know. Maybe they honor that. Maybe they attack it anyway. Maybe it doesn't make any difference. Maybe it's a bad question because it's so unlikely to happen. Why set people up for the frustration of having to defend that situation? But like I said, I guess it depends on the numbers for me, how I would feel about those things. But the pitch will be made. It's dumb to think about what happens if the superdelegates don't count in it, because they are not going to hesitate to cast those votes. So it's not a situation that's really going to happen. But anyway, pitches are going to have to be made on the second ballot, if there is one, for where those votes should go and why. And it's entirely possible, I mean, it's a tall order, but it's entirely possible that the Sanders people, having conducted themselves admirably between now and then, show up and say, look, it's purely a question of whether or not the last couple months have convinced you. Now that it was a great show of strength for Biden to sweep so many primary elections last night. And that's undoubtedly good for him. And now the question is, what does he do with that momentum between now and then? If a few months pass and Biden campaigns as though and this is very often the advice that candidates are given, campaign as though you're already the winner. Campaign as though you've locked up the convention. Don't worry about and don't contest things with Bernie Sanders right now, or whoever would be in second place in any hypothetical election. And you'll be fine. Just practice for the general election. Show people what you're going to give them in the general. Well, if he does that and we arrive at Minneapolis unconvinced, or many people are unconvinced that Joe Biden has whatever it is that it will take to beat Trump, then I guess if I don't know whether they would make this argument or not, but I suppose they could go forward and say, look, he just hasn't shown us that he's got what it's going to take. And our argument is we have. And then you could say, all right, well, then I suppose it's possible in an emergency situation to turn things around and say, yes, Biden carries more delegates into the first round, but doesn't have the nomination locked up, doesn't have the requisite 1,991 votes on the first ballot. You should all be thinking second ballot that, maybe we give it to the guy who's currently in quote-unquote second place. It's a totally legitimate outcome, and I suppose they ought to be telling people that it is one, and it's not outside of outside of contemplation anyway. Whether or not they're able to make that sale is a totally different question. Not just because of who they are and how they've conducted themselves to date, but who they're talking to and who the market is and what they're likely to believe about the two options that they have before them if they're limited to Sanders and and Biden. The audience just might not be a receptive one, even if we started with a blank slate. But, there is an argument to be made, and I haven't really seen it being made widely just yet, but you could talk about what motivated yesterday to happen. And I think you'll find a lot of receptivity to the idea, although you may find them people digging in their heels and saying, I don't care, I'm going to stick with this anyway. But, two general groups of voters went to the polls yesterday, and we heard so much about late-breaking choices and last-minute decisions. And if you look behind that, I think you may find, one significant chunk of voters went to the polls yesterday to vote for the candidate in which they really believe. And another group, another group of voters went to the polls yesterday saying, I don't really know, or I don't necessarily really believe in the person for whom I'm casting my vote. I just know I'm scared. Some people will say, I'm scared of Bernie Sanders. Others will say, I'm scared of Donald Trump. And I'm not worried about Bernie Sanders per se. And I even like Bernie Sanders, but I just don't think he'll beat Trump for whatever reason. Good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. The vote is being cast. You can't stop them. But that was a real thing. And you might be able to make a pitch. If things stay close and there's going to be a second ballot, you might be able to make the argument that, go with, when it comes to generating turnout in November, I know there was a lot of reason to doubt that Bernie Sanders will be able to generate the excitement and revolutionary turnout that he says he will in November, because he hasn't yet in the primaries. But it is a different animal, the general election, and circumstances are different, and there are many months running up to it, and you could very plausibly, I think, and maybe a different candidate would be better at doing it, but you could plausibly argue it's going to be about generating dedication, excitement, and turnout. And though it appears that Biden has produced that turnout, did they turn out for Biden or did they turn out for not Trump? And does that make a difference? So Rachel Bidikofer, of course, would say no. In some sense, it does not make a difference. And people are going to turn out for not Trump again in November. And as long as Biden is not Trump, that will work. And she herself says that Bernie Sanders creates a different calculus. But what will that calculus be, and how will it come out closer to the convention than we are right now? Well, it would depend on, I think, Sanders showing us a very different approach and a very different face between now and then, and whether or not people buy into the genuineness of this different face. But it's a possible thing to do, and I think that there's a real persuasive argument to be distilled out of the realization that the big night that Biden had didn't necessarily grow out of an overwhelming groundswell of support or love for Joe Biden, the person, the candidate, so much as it did an overwhelming sense of dread. And whether they gleaned it from the media or cues from Democratic leaders, aka the establishment, that the coalescing behind a different candidate was finally happening, and that it was Joe Biden. And all right, well then I guess I'm for Biden. I think there was an awful lot of that. And it's possible to probe it and find weaknesses. And and to do so, by the way, without it necessarily being viciously anti-Biden and trying to, knock the support out from beneath him, pull the rug out from under him. But in a short sprint to the convention, and with a lot of people to move, I think it may ultimately come down to that. And it might be doable, but only if there's a knockdown, drag out, and maybe that is something you want to leave aside. I don't know if Bernie Sanders is really the kind of person who's inclined to leave it aside, or maybe his supporters aren't, and he's somehow different. I really couldn't tell you. He's hard to read. I'm not entirely sure I get the full volume of his feelings from what his rhetoric is, depending on what point in the season we're at. Anyway, it's out there and it's exploitable, even if it's not necessarily his specialty, I guess. As a matter of fact, we had a comment earlier from Bosengood, who had tweeted to us that yesterday was really it's a can't take a chance moment. From a personal perspective, the comment is, Bernie aligns with almost all my policy views, but a vote for him is too risky, which I'm sure drives every diehard Sanders supporter up the wall. How do we get past it? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. It's not fair. Yeah, in a way, it doesn't, but it's still there as an obstacle, and you're going to have to figure out a way around it if you're going to make this thing work, and maybe there's just no way around it. I don't know. I found that an interesting thought, something to entertain, something to ponder for a little while. It does worry me a little bit that I don't feel like there was a groundswell of love and support for Biden. However, he's maybe the sort of person that can create that, or can absorb lessons and help from others that make him a person more able to generate that. And I guess they're just thinking maybe he's a more sympathetic figure to more Democratic voters than Bernie is capable of being. He is who he is, and that flinty exterior, you just can't get through it and change who's beneath it. And maybe that's a virtue, but it's not one that would necessarily win you an election. But maybe he finds a way to turn it into one. I don't know. The prediction is out there. And there will be contradictory ones out there too. But I felt like there were a lot of people who came out and cast their votes for Biden, not really necessarily wanting to do that. And that's dangerous when heading to a November contest with a guy whose base thinks he's God and can do no wrong. You would think that they would be out there being more passionate in greater numbers. That would be a huge danger. However, a smaller number of extremely passionate people can, in fact, and maybe this primary proved it to you, can in fact lose to an overwhelming number of people who don't feel as passionate about anything but their worry over whether or not they're going to be able to get rid of Donald Trump. So, that may end up winning it. All right. So while we've been babbling, or rather I've been babbling, and you've been wondering when I was going to stop, the news has come out. Michael Bloomberg suspending his campaign. That's the new parlance that they use for dropping out for whatever reason. I don't know whether that really means anything other than I'm dropping out, but that people do that now. They suspend their campaigns. And maybe it's been the last couple of cycles people have done that. And I don't know whether they really are thinking, well, if there's some emergency or circumstances change, I could come back. I've never seen anybody come back. But I guess in a field full of people in their 70s, there are certain emergencies one might imagine as becoming likelihoods or possibilities at the very least, which I don't know. I mean, I guess if you say you're dropping out and then somebody else either drops out or dies, for instance, and it could be anybody, what's to stop you from saying, I'm undropping out now, rather than saying, aha, I was only suspending my campaign, and so therefore I'm just turning it back on again. I don't know how that affects things. Maybe it freezes key staffers in place, but that would be up to them. Not, it wouldn't run according to the language you chose to use. But anyway, that's where we are. He's suspending his campaign, as many people thought was likely. All right, let's see. Moving on here to other subjects, and I think we'll move off of the campaign even. Let's see, other interesting things to toss into the mix here. Let's see, what do we got here? Why did I set this tweet aside from... yes. Oh, okay, right. Just to show you, the pocket representation of the tweet didn't tell me. This was just the video of the anti-dairy protesters who this time showed up at the Biden election night event to shout out "Let Dairy Die." And I believe there were two of them, and so equal opportunity there. They hit both Bernie Sanders and Biden so far. Let's see. Other things that perhaps deserve some attention. Yes. We are, of course, approaching our break, but I can give you this news. Manu Raju reporting for CNN yesterday. Democrats weigh holding Trump officials in contempt of Congress, and are torn over Bolton subpoena, which is amazing because you would think it would sort of be a no-brainer. But apparently someone is trying to inject brains into this no-brainer, and we'll see where we get to on this. House Democrats are quietly discussing moving ahead with punishments for individuals who defied subpoenas in President Donald Trump's impeachment inquiry, even as some are growing skeptical about issuing a subpoena for the testimony of former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, that sounds very promising, but from my initial skim of the article, I don't think they're thinking what we hoped they were thinking when it comes to punishments. I think it means we would like to have someone yell at you, but if that person declines to yell at you, well, then there's nothing we can do about it, is where they are. I don't think inherent contempt is in the offing in this article. Lawmakers involved in the discussions told CNN that they believe that the individuals who ignored their lawful subpoenas should be held in contempt, arguing that they should be held accountable for refusing to comply with compulsory orders, as Democrats probed whether Trump leveraged his office in pushing Ukraine to announce investigations. He did. And by the way, I believe Ukraine has actually gone ahead and announced it anyway. And I don't know what's going to come of that or how they came to that decision. But I did see that hinted at the other day on Twitter, and I haven't read up on it yet. We'll have to catch up there. Anyway, yes. So they believe they should be held in contempt, but we know that that doesn't really work. So I'm not sure what they're getting at here. At the same time, some Democrats who had been pushing hard for Bolton to testify in the impeachment inquiry are showing little appetite now to pursue his testimony amid the possibility that it could lead to a court fight and also distract from the party's election year messaging. And that just kind of sets my teeth on edge. By the way, this article written in full contemplation of the decision in the McGahn case, so I'm not entirely sure whether or not the aforementioned lawful status of the subpoenas actually exists. And I don't know if that's taken into account in this article. I don't see it mentioned. So, okay. The discussions underscore how Democrats are trying to navigate the post-impeachment terrain, with some eager to tie up loose ends from their sweeping investigations and others more keen on focusing on domestic issues central to their 2020 agenda. This is the sort of thing. I guess this doesn't really have anything to do directly with Joe Biden and his movement towards clinching the nomination, but it really kind of does. And this is the sort of thing that I think everybody has in the back of their minds about whether or not Biden is the fighter we need, and can he really do what needs to be done, and is he going to really present pitched battle here and do what needs to do, or is he going to fall under the sway of the, and maybe they're right, nobody really knows, the advisors who say kitchen table issues, people want to talk about health care and their checkbooks, not about holding the Trump gang accountable, even though, you know, that probably had as much to do with his victories yesterday as anything. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netflix Radio. By the way, just one more item to add to the primary roundup. So again, a difference in the language used. Bloomberg suspending his campaign. The report I have here on Warren is that she's reassessing her campaign after a disappointing Super Tuesday. This according to the headline in The Hill. She's taking a day to assess whether she still has a path to the Democratic nomination after a disappointing Super Tuesday, in which she failed to net a substantial delegate haul, flying home to Boston late Tuesday after a Detroit rally. No public events scheduled for the day. I don't know whether that's supposed to leave the door open more than a suspension, but less than a no, we're going forward. I don't know. We'll see. But everyone's selecting their own delicately worded language about those things. But it's pretty much what you had to expect after yesterday's results. So, okay. Back to CNN to see if we can figure out what, if anything, Democrats as a whole are going to do in the House. I'm sure there's a big split over what to do in several of the cases. And we'll see if we can get anything of value out of this article. My fear is no. I don't think that they're thinking of doing anything truly impactful here. But let's see if we can understand their thinking. Again, many Democrats, as they say, showing little appetite for pursuing Bolton's testimony amid the possibility that it could lead to a court fight. It would, and also distract from the party's election year messaging. And by the way, the court fight that it would lead to is probably essentially the same one as we saw with a disappointing outcome from the D.C. Circuit on Don McGahn. That's the fact that case came out the way it did probably does mean it would lead to a court fight. I don't really know what's motivating John Bolton. I mean, people say, well, the book, obviously, and sales of the book, but if he wants to reveal the information, then, I don't know when the book is coming out. Also, of course, publication of the book may end up being blocked, and so it's not only would the information not get out, but he wouldn't even get the benefit of the money either. So, not sure how that will play out. But I just chalk it up to it. He's a Republican at heart, and he likes screwing over the Democratic House as much as possible because he gets a kick out of that, unfortunately. Anyway, the discussions underscore, as we said, how Democrats are trying to navigate this post-impeachment terrain. No decisions have been made on either front, lawmakers said, but the topics have been discussed among members of the House Intelligence Committee as Democrats weigh their next steps after Trump became the third president in history to be impeached by the House and then acquitted by the Senate. There's a pretty vibrant debate over the wisdom of calling Bolton, said Jim Himes, Connecticut Democrat who sits on the committee, adding, there's a question about whether he's going to impart any new information. There's also a question about whether he would do it honestly and forthrightly. He said it's an open question whether interviewing him before obtaining any of his notes and records would be fruitful, while also contending that pursuing Bolton could compromise the intensity of the Democrats' election year message, which, by the way, if you have figured out what the Democrats' election year message is and it's not anti-Trump, let me know, because it would be nice to be able to assess it. I'm in the camp, he says, that says, I'm not sure we're going to learn more from John Bolton. I think eventually it's important to know what he knows, but I don't feel any urgency, Himes said. And it's hard not to feel that urgency for me, except I guess I might say, in all likelihood, Bolton will do what he can to muddy it. And then, of course, there's the distinct possibility, the probability, really, that certainly Trump fans will just say, that doesn't mean anything. We didn't find out anything new. And even reporters who are astonished by what they find out will just basically say, but this just doesn't change anything. Nothing's going to happen. Trump will still be president. The end. They're not going to impeach him again. They certainly could. We all know that. But they're not going to. So does it really matter? And then it's all normalized again. And once again, we'll just have a regular old election between two regular guys who might as well be president, right? Anyway, what has complicated matters, the CNN article continues, what's complicated matters more is the ruling on Friday, here's a mention of it anyhow, by a federal appeals court dismissing the House Judiciary Committee's attempt to force former White House counsel Don McGahn to comply with its subpoena for his testimony. Democrats plan to appeal the ruling, but the decision could bolster efforts by Bolton to fight any House subpoena. Several Democrats, at the moment, say it makes more sense to wait until Bolton publishes a book that he's writing, detailing his time in the White House and his interactions with Trump over the Ukraine saga, or to see if the White House succeeds in preventing its publication. I think it would be a wise decision to wait to see the book, if it's out in a reasonable amount of time, to serve as a guide for us, said Florida Representative Val Demings, a Democratic member of the committee who served as a House impeachment manager. That's, to me, is like, well, we don't know whether it's even coming out. It's a wise decision to wait and see. Why is that wise? I'm not entirely sure. The problem is that we may wait and then find out it's not coming out, and then what? I don't know. I guess what they're really saying is it's just up to the voters at this point. House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff and Speaker Nancy Pelosi have not indicated their preference on moving ahead with either a subpoena or holding individuals in contempt. There were 14 people who ignored Democratic subpoenas during the impeachment inquiry, including White House Acting Chief of Staff. Oh, yes, right. We forgot our sound effect. The White House Acting Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, White House Budget Official Michael Duffy, and White House National Security Council Attorney John Eisenberg. No decisions have been made, but members have begun discussing whether to subpoena Bolton and under what circumstances, including if the White House succeeds in blocking publication of Bolton's book, a committee official told CNN. Additionally, no decisions have been made on contempt, but it's been a matter of discussion. Himes, Demings, and other Democrats all indicated support for taking action against people who ignored their subpoenas. It's actually a discussion point that's underway right now. Washington Representative Denny Heck, a Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, said when asked about holding individuals in contempt, I think people do need to be held accountable in some form for defying this. Otherwise, what you've done is significantly downgraded the institutions, and these institutions sustain us. They don't. Himes added that Those who ignored a lawful subpoena should be reprimanded, especially since those who complied with the subpoenas and cooperated with House Democrats are the ones who ended up facing backlash from Trump and others. There has to be consequences for those who chose to ignore lawful congressional subpoenas, Himes said. And those people will, of course, say they weren't lawful subpoenas. Or, they weren't unlawful, but it's also lawful for us not to pay attention to them, according to the D.C. Circuit. So, why bother? What are you bugging me for? I think it's really important for this institution, Himes continues, to stand up for itself. So, I do think there should be adverse consequences for those who ignored congressional subpoenas. And that's a reasonable position to take. I agree with it. We'll get to the end of the article here. But the problem is, that's a great thing to say, but how will you do it? Because holding a vote on contempt of Congress and then handing the prosecution of the contempt charge to the U.S. Attorney for D.C. results in nothing. So when you say, I think people should be held accountable, you can't really be talking about statutory contempt of Congress because that won't hold them accountable. So what are you really saying? Are you really just saying, I want to say that they need to be held accountable, but I'm not going to hold them accountable? Or are you saying, you know very well that the only actual punishment that can be meted out is inherent contempt, but you won't do it? Or you will do it, but you don't want to say that you'll do it because that'll panic people? I could see where inherent contempt, actually doing something, actually arresting these individuals and jailing them, if anything's going to distract from whatever the Democratic message is supposed to be in this coming election, that'll probably do it. The question is, does it distract in a way that enhances our elections prospects? It might not be the case that it hurts our elections prospects by showing that we're decisive and tough and willing to actually hold people accountable when we say we're going to do it. Or it could, it could scare people because it's frightening that people would be arrested by Congress, and that's weird. And could they do that to me? And there's no reason to think that they would do that to you, but that's not what Donald Trump is going to tell you. He'll tell you that it's a coup and they're tyrants and they're going to end up putting you in jail unless if you don't knuckle under to their socialist agenda. And it won't matter that Biden ends up the nominee and not Sanders. It's still going to be a socialist agenda. They'll still attack us based on that. Would it stick better against Bernie? It's a theory. It's a pretty good one at that. But will it be used? Yeah, probably. No reason to think that it wouldn't be. So, it goes on to say, Demings added her 2 cents here. I do believe that everybody should be held accountable. Just what the F does that mean is the real question. The Bolton calculation is more complicated, if you can believe it. Since the end of the impeachment trial, Bolton has declined to speculate about what he would do if the House Intelligence Committee served him with a subpoena now. But his attorney last fall indicated that he would take a House subpoena to court, a threat that led Schiff to decide against issuing one for Bolton over concerns that it would lead to a protracted court fight. I'm still not really understanding what he was afraid of with the protracted court fight, considering that he was already in one over McGahn. They're not saying that they're afraid of continuing with that one. They've said they want to appeal it. So they're going to take an already protracted court fight and protract it even more. Why is that not scary, but doing it with Bolton is scary? I do not have an explanation for that. Neither Bolton nor his attorney responded to a request for comment. In January, Bolton changed his tune and issued a statement saying he'd be willing to testify at Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate if he were served with a subpoena. That led to a contentious fight between the two parties, with Republican senators ultimately prevailing and blocking moving forward with a subpoena. Republicans argued there was little new information that Bolton could provide for the case Democrats made, which I guess they're right about because Jim Himes just said the same damn thing. That seems awfully stupid. Some Democrats worry issuing a subpoena now would amount to very little. The fact of the matter is, he could be subpoenaed and ignore it, and then where are we? Heck asked. He already told us that he was going to ignore a subpoena, and a pending court case can go on forever. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, but what did Heck say a minute ago, further up in this? He said, oh yeah, that was him who said that subpoenaing or holding people in contempt is under discussion. It's a discussion point that's underway right now. I think people do need to be held accountable in some form for defying this, or otherwise what you've done is significantly downgraded the institutions, and the institutions sustain us. That was the Heck comment. And then later he says that we could subpoena Bolton, but he could ignore it, and then where are we? Well, you'd be where you are now with the other people that you subpoenaed and they ignored it. And you're saying that you should hold those people accountable. See, this doesn't make any goddamn sense. I just think, and I assume that they're hoping that the whole world just doesn't listen to this podcast and can't figure out that it doesn't make any damn sense. But if you issued a subpoena for Bolton and he ignored it, then where would we be? You would be where you are right now with the other 14 people who got subpoenaed and ignored it. And it's your contention that that's bad and that the House should do something about it, and they should move forward with a contempt vote. And if they move forward with a contempt vote, what ends up happening, does everybody not remember? I mean, we all must remember this. I guess just members of Congress don't remember this. When we talked about it 13 years ago, when George W. Bush's people were ignoring subpoenas, if you hold them in contempt of Congress, you end up referring the case for prosecution in the Article 3 federal courts to usually the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And any U.S. Attorney that you might refer to is basically under the control of the Justice Department. And Bill Barr will just say, yeah, don't bring charges. And then where will you be? You'll be exactly where you were before, and exactly where a Bolton subpoena would leave you. My question is, why not subpoena Bolton so that when and if you finally do find a way to resolve the issue with the 14 other people who have been subpoenaed and have ignored it, you can take care of Bolton at the same time. Because if a magical solution presents itself for the 14 people who have been subpoenaed and ignored it, and you take advantage of it, that's not available to you with respect to John Bolton until you have subpoenaed him and he has refused and you hold him in contempt. Why not start that process now? If you suspect that he will ignore it, then get it done and hold him in contempt along with the other 14. Why do this in two steps, 14 people at one time and then John Bolton later? And just because he's going to write a book? I mean, that's great and all. And maybe we'll all eventually find out what he has to say about the situation by buying his book, or stealing his book, for that matter, if you don't want to talk about giving him money. But then what? I mean, he still hasn't done what was supposed to have been done, come to Congress and testify about things. And the fact that he spills the beans on his schedule doesn't help me with the fact that he willfully ignored our schedule. Hold him to account for ignoring the schedule. That doesn't make any sense to bifurcate as between Bolton and everybody else, except on one issue. When it comes to the process of actually holding people accountable at some point, it's going to make a difference that Bolton was never subpoenaed. And then, so now it makes sense to treat the two cases differently. But I'm saying treat them the same. Subpoena him and put him in the same pot with the other 14 and take care of all of them at once. Anyway, what I'm not able to glean from this article is any indication whatsoever that current members of Congress understand what they're talking about when it comes to contempt of Congress. They all speak about it as a necessity, and I mean, it's amazing to come to understand that members of Congress could really be serving in this capacity and be so intimately wrapped up in this issue and be issuing calls for accountability and not have discovered, as we did 13 years ago, that it's just not in the offing if you go through the regular process, and that there is this other process. And, I would rather find out just outright that, yeah, we know about inherent contempt and we find it scary and we're just not going to do it, because then I would know where we stand. It bothers me to find out afterwards. Sometimes, astonishingly, you find these things out later on. What? There's another thing? Oh, we didn't know. Oh, well, we've just been telling you about it for 13 years. Yeah, but I don't pay attention to you little people. And that's terrible. That's very disturbing when you find that out. So, I don't know what to tell you. I think that's what's happening here. And I don't know. I guess we have to do another education campaign. And, be prepared to do it all over again and find the same things that we found last time. No, that's not a real thing. You can't really do that. Remember, just like the filibuster reform fight, right? That's not the way rules change. That doesn't really exist. That's not really a thing. Oh, it is? Oh, it is a thing? Oh, we succeeded in actually doing it? Oh, wow. What a surprise. There were members of the Senate who had no idea, or who professed to have no idea, that you could change the rules that way, and thought that it was just some liberal blog fantasy, including people who had actually participated in changing the rules that way in the past. They just pretended, or maybe actually had forgotten, that it had been done and that they had participated in it. Pat Leahy and Joe Biden were there for it and continued to insist that it wasn't the real thing. I don't know why. They just did. And here again, like last time around with inherent contempt, when Henry Waxman was chair of the Government Oversight Committee, and his subpoenas were being ignored, and he found out that the U.S. attorney was unlikely to prosecute statutory contempt claims against his targets, in this case, Josh Bolton, not John, but Josh Bolton with an E, and Harriet Myers. And we said, well, have you given any thought to inherent contempt? Inherent contempt? What's that? Reporters asked him, have you given any thought to it? Do you know what it is? No. How do you end up chairman of the Government Oversight Committee and not know? It happens. But it's one of those things where you just assume that, of course, they know. They just don't want to do it. Sometimes they just don't know. And it takes a campaign to educate them. All right. Moving on. Let's do something completely different. We have like a little under 10 minutes left. Let's throw it back to Trump Russia, because why not? I would love to restart that inquiry. So what have we got? Well, our one of our friendly listeners has shared with us here. Patrick Snyder has shared the tweet thread, the latest tweet thread, the sleuthing, I guess, from the Twitter user we've come to know as Uncle Blazer, or the actual Twitter address of Blake's Mustache, believe it or not. Blake's Mustache. Do you remember this? But somehow Uncle Blazer seems somehow more accessible to me. Anyway, he's got a new thread that Patrick describes, and I think he's largely right in the description here, as interesting, grounded speculation about the grand Russian operation in which we find ourselves mired. And why not? Let's get conspiratorial minded. It makes a certain amount of sense. It's not total nonsense on first read. Here's the thread. Felix Sater, where it all began. Remember him? The late 1980s through the 1990s were a high time for the Russian mob in New York City. We've all heard as much, right? An aggressive district attorney in the Department of Justice's famously aggressive Southern District of New York had decimated the 5 families of La Cosa Nostra, the New York mob, leaving a power vacuum that the Russian mob stood ready to fill. I mean, are we not talking about who that was? Who that aggressive district attorney in the Department of Justice's famously aggressive Southern District of New York Well, I mean, is that not Rudy Giuliani? But whatever. We don't want to distract from this. The Russian mob is, and we've speculated as much here too, right? The Russian mob is an officially sanctioned arm of Russian military intelligence. I don't know if I would go that far, but I do think there's a relationship there that isn't quite understood. We don't have it here in the United States, and we have a hard time conceiving of a government having such a relationship with mobsters, but I think that's what's going on in Russia. Right, so the Russian mob is an officially sanctioned arm of Russian military intelligence, essentially serving as their financing arm abroad. Unlike the Italian mob, which works to enhance its own wealth and further its own goals exclusively, the Russian mob has other goals. And why wouldn't it? It's a different mob, right? The Russian mob answers to Mother Russia with twin goals of raising funds through illicit means and finding ways to launder flight capital produced by the kleptocratic government in Russia. If you're having trouble, by the way, finding room to believe in that kind of relationship between the Russian mob and the Russian government, think back to the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the governmental need in Russia for an infusion of hard currency from the West. How do you get it? How do you get your hands on it? And it may be that it grew out of that the government turns to the mobsters who are able to launder money and earn money illicitly abroad and vacuum that all up, hoover it all up, whatever they can get, and bring it back to Russia. We need an infusion of hard currency to bolster our economy. It doesn't matter how we get it, and I'm not sure that the Western governments will allow us to have it. So do it this way. This is the quickest way to get us that infusion. Russia's government, the thread continues, is deeply corrupt, with those at the top controlling the means of production, still, even though they're post-communist, aluminum, oil, natural gas, etc. That's where all the oligarchs are, right? And laundering the ill-gotten gains through mob operations in European and U.S. economies. Felix Sater was an agent of the Russian mob. In the late 1990s, he'd been pinched by the FBI as part of a boiler room stock scheme run as a rare collaboration between the Russian mob and the Italian mob, La Cosa Nostra. When he got caught, which may well have been by design, Sater became a cooperating witness, helping prosecutors and the FBI make their case against the Italian mob. Sater's cooperation was not only permitted by Russia, it was their idea. Sater's cooperation hurt the Italian mob, weakening the competition. More importantly, the Russian mob needed to keep the FBI focused on the Italian mob so it could create a bigger distraction. And if Sater could gain the FBI's trust, perhaps he could help point the FBI toward terrorism and away from the Russian mob's growing criminal enterprise in the U.S. Sater exceeded Russia's expectations, becoming a key FBI informant, exposing arms deals with terrorists in the Middle East, and even providing the coordinates for Osama bin Laden's operations. Sater proved to be the FBI's top confidential informant in the war on terror. Sater's sources for the information he provided were members of the Russian military intelligence apparatus he claimed to cross paths with in his career as a telecommunications consultant. The FBI never seemed to question how it was that Sater convinced his sources to give him incredibly sensitive information, nor did they seem to comprehend that Russia had an interest in focusing their attention on Middle East terrorism and away from domestic organized crime. And the FBI was interested in that post 9/11 anyway. Who could blame the FBI? They had a source giving them incredible information, allowing them to thwart huge arms sales bound for Al-Qaeda and disrupt the terror organization's funding sources. There was no incentive to scrutinize Sater. He was a gold mine. Having completed years of service as an FBI informant, in 2000, Sater found himself back in New York. Sater had become one of the greatest Russian military assets in their history. Felix Sater had the complete trust and confidence of federal law enforcement and could drop a dime anytime Russia wanted to send the FBI off to chase terrorism abroad, leaving Russia unchecked to run its criminal operations in the FBI's backyard. Russian military intelligence is never content with a valuable asset. Sater's next act would be as a leading player in the biggest intelligence coup in history, tasked with cultivating Donald Trump as a Russian agent and setting him on a course to become President of the United States. And there's much more to this, but at least you now see the connection between where he started and setting him on the path with corrupting Donald Trump himself. Just a little bit more here, pointing out that Trump himself at that point was a failure. He'd inherited millions of dollars from his father, but squandered it on terrible deals laundering money for the Italian mob. But the more successful an operation is at laundering money, the more disastrous it is as a business operation. By 2000, Trump is broke. His numerous bankruptcies made him a pariah to banks, rendering him unable to access capital to bolster his fledgling commercial enterprises. This is a man who managed to defy the axiom that the house always wins and actually lost money running casinos. Trump was a loser. Losers make great marks for organized crime. The Italian mob had used Trump, but the Russian mob wanted more. Russia wanted to own Trump and make him their puppet, and I guess they went about doing it with cash.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, the rest of the story, and there's more to the thread, of course, I'll share it with you, is stuff that we've covered before, beginning with Sater's arrival in Trump Tower and ingratiating himself to Trump. We'll explore that further during the rest of the week. Now, though, time to hand things over to Justice Button for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next here on Netroots Radio. Stay tuned.